Ceann Comhairle. Back in December, I had the opportunity to speak on the organisation of Working Time Bill related to domestic violence leave, which was brought forward by Sinn Féin and received support from all sides of this House. I'll take the opportunity to reinforce some of the things I said on that occasion, but also to highlight some very concerning developments which have come to light in recent weeks. We all know that abuse can take many different forms: sexual abuse, domestic abuse, emotional abuse, threats, intimidation, manipulation, neglect, financial control, domineering behaviour, coercive control, and other threatening and controlling behaviours. The figures I had available from the National Crime Council show that 1 in 7 women had experienced severe abusive behaviour of a physical, sexual or emotional nature from a partner at some point in her life. Its survey estimated that 213,000 women had been severely abused by a partner. These figures displayed the extent of the problem. The figure of 213,000 will no doubt have increased since then. And of course, it's not just women who are on the receiving end of such abuse either. It seems men may be less likely to admit vulnerability in that regard or to seek help. Plenty of work is being done to encourage men to get help, but there is still work to be done and encourage greater openness. There are a couple of major problems that present themselves in the last month with regard to domestic abuse. The first of those is a reported increase in the levels of domestic abuse. Women's Aid report a 43% rise in contacts with its services from 2019 to 2020. Among the difficulties being expressed is that due to lockdown and working from home, victims found it even more difficult to get away from the abusive situation. People reported being stuck with abusive partners all day. But with no money and no housing, it can often seem pointless to think of leaving. So we must ensure that that message and train of thought changes through provisions for victims. The second issue is in relation to how disclosures of abuse have been dealt with. I shall repeat my final sentence of my speech from last December. To those who may currently be experiencing domestic abuse, seek help in any way you can from the Gardaí, local support services, a trusted friend or family member. Do not suffer in silence. Ceann Comhairle, when I advised victims of domestic abuse to seek support from sources such as the Gardaí, I did so in good faith, in the belief that if a victim of abuse contacted Gardaí, that they would find the help they needed. Unfortunately, recent reports show that the Garda response in a large number of cases appear to be unsatisfactory, to say the least. The news that Gardaí cancelled 3,120 domestic abuse calls is hugely concerning and stomach-churning. The investigation found that only 35% of those cancelled calls were cancelled legitimately. The report says that a further 20% Gardaí responded to, but no official record was kept, while the remaining 45% of cancelled calls are still under investigation. I hope we will see a thorough investigation and report on the remaining 45% to identify the reasons for cancellation and the procedures put in place to prevent the problem from occurring again. We can all see the problems here with revelations like this. We have seen over many years the efforts made by support services and support groups, but campaigns to encourage people to seek help will only be successful if people are confident that the help will be available when it's sought. Taking the step to pick up the phone and ask for help is a big step. It is often a very traumatic step, and it takes a lot of courage. In the last month, we have reports splashed all over the news that domestic abuse calls are being cancelled, and what is the damage as a result? How many people will decide to suffer in silence rather than seek help? In a follow-up to the news of the cancellation of domestic abuse calls, we saw news last week that Gardaí had launched a follow-up investigation into more than 19,000 other cancelled emergency calls related to crimes such as sexual offences, assaults and burglaries. Now, I really hope, Ceann Comhairle, that there is some innocent explanation to all of this, and that people's cries for help were not ignored or cancelled by Gardaí. But nonetheless, we need answers, because the perception is already out there now that help was not always forthcoming when required. I want to state also that the Gardaí involved in the cancelling of calls, not on a legitimate basis, have done a great disservice to their colleagues, and I want to outline that we should never paint all Gardaí with the same brush, but it is fundamental as to why we need some very targeted, very dedicated and very visible campaigns to help repair some of the reputational damage that reports like this will no doubt have caused. There are a great many things which can be done to improve the situation for sufferers of abuse and for those who commit abuse. We must recognise that in addition to punishment, in most, if not all cases, the abuser needs help with rehabilitation, possibly treatment for an underlying condition which may be causing them to act in the abusive way. Even if the abuse is at such a level where the punishment is a prison sentence, we need to have systems in place where the abuser is less likely to reoffend on their return to society at the end of their sentence. Otherwise, the punishment would just be kicking the can down the road. This is a big challenge. I know work is already going on around rehabilitation of offenders, and perhaps we could look at ways of further supporting such rehabilitation. But whenever we do, we must make sure that we have the basics right. And to me, the basics would include confidence in the fact that when an abuse call is put into the Gardaí, that it will be dealt with in a thorough and professional manner. We can have numerous awareness campaigns and TV ads that encourage people to seek help, but first and foremost, we must ensure that when that help is sought, it is available. When the victim of abuse shows the bravery required to pick up the phone, we must ensure that there is a helpful response at the other end, and so that the feeling of hopelessness ends and not a never-ending negative. I want to pay tribute to those who were involved in dealing with women and victims, men and women, of domestic abuse or violence of any nature. Women's Aid Support, the Women's Refuge in Wexford, Still Here, and the Gardaí, many of whom are the only port of call for victims and have done their job to the best of their ability. Thank you, Ken.